The proceeding will start shortly. 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 The proceeding will start shortly.
The Lord Privy Seal.
My Lords, I beg to move that the Bill for the better regulation of select vestries be now read for a first time.
The question is that this bill will be now read a first time. As many as of that opinion will say content.
Content.
The contrary not content. The contents have it. My Lords, I have to acquaint the House that His Majesty was pleased this morning to make a most gracious speech from the throne to both Houses of Parliament, assembled in the House of Lords. Copies of the gracious speech are available in the printed paper office, and I have, for the convenience of the House, arranged for the terms of the gracious speech to be published in the official report.
My Lords, I beg to move that a humble address be presented to His Majesty as follows. Most gracious Sovereign, we, Your Majesty's most dutiful and loyal subjects, Lords spiritual and temporal, in Parliament assembled, beg leave to thank Your Majesty for the most gracious speech which Your Majesty has addressed to both Houses of Parliament. My Lords, it is an honour and a privilege to be asked to deliver this speech. It's also a pleasure, since I am joined by Baroness Hazarika as seconder to this speech. This will be news to you, but we were born in the same county in Lanarkshire. We were born in the same town in Lanarkshire. Indeed, we were born in the same hospital in the same town in Lanarkshire, though sadly, as the merest glance will confirm, not in the same decade. I can't pretend to you, nor would my noble friend, that Lanarkshire politics is a sort of preparatory school for the refinement of the House of Lords. Indeed, I was prompted to think about Lanarkshire politics this morning when I noticed in the ceremonial guide that the gentlemen at arms were requested to hand in their axes after the meeting. And certainly Aisha will know, among others, of the unfortunate tale of the leader of the council in Lanarkshire, who was so ground down by the internecine warfare in his council that he was eventually hospitalised and received a get-well card which read, "The Labour group wish you a speedy recovery," by 18 votes to 12. With 9 abstentions. My Lords, there is no such lack of empathy in this House. Indeed, I owe much to the courtesy and assistance of so many noble lords in this chamber. I can't mention them all, but there's certainly 2. Can I mention the noble Lord Solmes, who, as Armed Forces Minister, reached across the chamber of the House of Commons and gave me such wonderful help, advice and encouragement when I was a new Shadow Defence spokesman that I ended up with his job, and I want to thank him for that. The other one can't be with us today, but I want to record my thanks, and that is Lord Kinnock, not only because he introduced me to parliamentary politics, but for his courage and leadership against Labour's first bout of infantile leftism in 1983, coincidentally the year Michael Gove briefly joined the Labour Party. Because without that leadership of Neil Kinnock, there would have been no future Labour governments. So without people like that, I have to say I would not be moving this humble address today. Therefore, I don't approach today's programme for government in a tribal fashion. I commend it to the whole House. Now, there may be some of you who, having known me for some years, I see Lord Forsyth laughing in unison, who thinks that I can't reach across party boundaries. For those sceptical of my qualifications to make such an appeal, I can tell them that I am, as far as I'm aware, the only Labour Defence spokesman ever to have addressed a Conservative audience in the Carrollton Club. I'll tell you what happened. If you're interested. It happened that at the end of an official defence visit to Cyprus, on our half-day rest and recreation, as we all relaxed around the pool and the spa, as you do, I had been challenged in the pool by that delightfully eccentric Conservative MP, Lady Olga Maitland. Oh, wow. She challenged me to address her organisation called Families for NATO, more widely known as Babies for the Bomb. I was happy to do so. I was less happy when she took to explaining to the bemused Tory audience in the Cattleton Club that the only reason this Labour stalwart had accepted the invitation was that when she tendered it and I accepted it in Cyprus, in her words, neither of us were fully clothed. I have to say, I'm not suggesting this is a template for future government deliverables. My Lords, of course, there are areas of controversy in the King's speech. It's a very full programme. But I believe there's much that should be given a fair wind by all sides in this chamber. On planning, infrastructure and economic growth, on industrial strategy and local devolution, on clean energy and children's well-being, on safer streets and stronger borders, on reforming our public services, which is desperately needed, and in restoring our capability in national defence. I believe it's a solid foundation on which to bring about that reset that our new Prime Minister mentioned on his first day in office. It will fall to Baroness Smith, of course, to take this programme forward. I have to say, she has a hard act to follow. She follows a leader in this chamber whose patience and courtesy seem to me at times, how can I put it, too good to be true. But I know that Baroness Smith is up to the task, because what Churchill said of military leadership also, in my view, applies in politics. Without the title deeds of positive achievement, he said, no one has the power or the right to give clear leadership. And I believe the noble Baroness holds those title deeds, not only through her service in this chamber, but I know, as my Minister in Northern Ireland, she led and commandeered not one or two or three, but 4 departments of state. So I warn my colleagues in the front bench, keep a tight grip in your portfolio. There are many of our former colleagues that all of us would have wished to see here today, particularly, if I might say so, on these benches because of the new Labour government. There are too many to mention in full. But I will miss personally the late Baroness McDonagh. She was respected and loved by so many of us, and it's a tragedy she didn't live to see the Labour government. She did so much to achieve. There is now a huge responsibility, my Lords, on that government, not just in implementing legislation, not just in singular acts that pass through this chamber, but in restoring faith in politics. As we cast an eye over our continent, we can all see the spectre of those 3 horsemen of extremism: economic instability, a contempt for the whole political class, and foreigners to blame. We don't need a crystal ball. We've all read the history books. These conditions have always been the harbingers of extremism. And even now, it is sweeping across Europe. For now, we have escaped it. But we may not always escape it. The next few years will determine that. And it falls to us, my Lords, to plant the flag of democracy and social democracy firmly in the ground and to defend it. Above all, we need to persuade the British people to trust government and politicians a bit more. By our integrity, by our actions, by our attitudes, and by our service. And so as the lodestar for the coming years, we couldn't choose a better one than the final words of the final speech of the late John Smith, the night before he died. The opportunity to serve, he said, that is all we ask. My Lords, that surely should be sufficient for all of us. My Lords, I beg to move that a humble address be presented to His Majesty.
Yeah. Well done. Very done.
Well done, John. The question is that a humble address be presented to His Majesty as follows. Most gracious Sovereign, we, Your Majesty's most dutiful and loyal subjects, the Lords spiritual and temporal in Parliament assembled, beg leave to thank Your Majesty for the most gracious speech which Your Majesty has addressed to both Houses of Parliament.
My Lords, I beg to second my noble friend's motion for a humble address in reply to His Majesty's most gracious speech. I would like to begin by thanking my noble friends, the Leader of the House and the Chief Whip, for doing me the great honour of asking me to speak on this historic and most auspicious occasion. I congratulate them on their appointments. Baroness Smith and Lord Kennedy show all Labour peers such kindness, patience and friendship. They are hard-working, decent people who take their responsibilities seriously. And I do mean that literally. Lord Kennedy, in particular, is a very active Chief Whip, which of course will be much needed in the years ahead. Now, when I first joined this place just a few weeks ago, he took me aside and warned me in a pleasant but slightly menacing way that I would receive more text messages from him than anyone else in my life. And he was right. I've had so many messages that my phone has automatically saved him as my special emergency contact number. It's a lot. At times, it's gone a bit baby reindeer, to be honest. If you know, you know. Yeah. But his support is very much appreciated, and I wish them both well. They will do an excellent job for their party and for this House, which they care deeply about. I would also like to pay tribute to my noble friend, Lord Reid. As he said, we both hail from the same part of Scotland. We were born in Bellshill Maternity Hospital in North Lanarkshire. I don't know if it was testament to what we went on to achieve, but that has now been destroyed as a building. Lord Reid went to school in Coatbridge, where I grew up. St Pat's, a great school, alongside my very dear friend, Baroness Liddell of Coatdyke. What alumni! And they had a historical first, because they were the first pair of state school kids to both serve in a cabinet together. Yes, it's very, very impressive. And Lord Reid actually put this to the then Prime Minister, Tony Blair, and he said, look, you know, we're the first set of state kids from the same comprehensive to get into the cabinet. What do you think about that? And apparently the former Prime Minister said, that is good, but I think I've done a bit better than the both of you. Now, my father was the local family GP in Coatbridge back in the 1970s and the 1980s. And as I have said before in this House, it was not easy being an immigrant in Coatbridge at that time. There weren't a lot of black or brown people. A lot of orange folk, mind. We love a tanning booth in Coatbridge, what can I say? And when my dad first started as a doctor, one of his patients said to him, "What are you?" "A Muslim," he replies. "Aye, but what kind? A Rangers Muslim or a Celtic Muslim?" Now, given my noble friend's great role as chairman of Celtic Football Club, I think I know what the answer should have been to that question. I did tell that story in my maiden speech, but like our great king, I'm very much into recycling these days. And it's a real honour to follow Lord Reid. I have really admired him throughout my career. And also been slightly scared of him, I have to say, because he is known as the hard man of Scottish politics. That is actually a compliment, by the way. Now, I am a relatively new member of this House. I only made my maiden speech on the very last day of the last Parliament. So it's so exciting to be here speaking on the first day of this new session. Now, I gather that the role of being a seconder is given to someone on the up. Well, I thought I better get a move on, because I'm now 48 years old. And with the rumoured retirement age of 80, I've only got another 32 years left to make my mark. Now, this is a bit shallow, but I'll be honest with you. As a woman of a certain age, I was feeling a wee bit depressed about my advancing years. Not anymore. I have to say, I feel rather sprightly since coming in here. I've never felt so good. Now, I'm normally a bit of a lefty feminist battle axe when it comes to any comments about my personal appearance, until a very lovely lord from the other side took me aside recently and said, "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but it's so nice to have a fine young thing like you in here." To which I was like, "Who, me? Stop it! Stop it!" I know. So my beauty advice to ladies of a certain age is, you honestly don't need to get Botox, you just need a peerage. But listen, there are many people of many ages here, including many younger than me, and they have been so kind to me as well, and it's really appreciated. Now, many of us recognise that this place does need reform, but in the meantime, the voices of people from all backgrounds and all ages should be heard in this very special place. Now, this takes me to the King's speech. We have a relatively new King and we have a very new Prime Minister. And this is the first transfer of power to a Labour administration since 1997. That's 27 years ago. Things were very different back then. There was no social media. There was no mobile phones. I don't know how Lord Kennedy would have survived, to be honest. The film Titanic was only released back in 1997, which was the last time Leonardo DiCaprio was seen with a woman his own age. Yeah, it was a very long time ago, a very, very long time ago. Now, as a wise man once said, this is no time for sound bites, but I feel the hand of history on my shoulder. And this is a significant moment because this is the legislative to-do list for this new government. Our new Prime Minister has pledged to govern in service to this great country. This is a bold set of plans which is mission-led and based on prosperity, security, fairness and opportunity for all. It shows ambition, breadth and modernity. There are important measures to stimulate growth and to get Britain building again, houses and vital transport and infrastructure. But here are a few other highlights which stand out to me. I am most pleased to see the Workers' Rights Bill. We cannot get growth if we do not have a motivated and productive workforce. Treating workers well is the right thing to do. Every single one of us in this House was shocked by the way P&O Ferries sacked their staff 2 years ago. That kind of behaviour should not be accepted in this day and age. Our trade unions do such important work, and I want to pay tribute to the many members in this House who have dedicated their lives to better employment rights. At their best, trade unions are a strong friend at work, and if we are to get growth, there is a sweet spot where businesses and employers and trade unions work in a cooperative partnership. Now, as someone who in a previous life helped draft the 2010 Equality Act, I was heartened to see plans for a draft Race Equalities Act, which will give people from Black, Asian or other ethnic minority backgrounds the right to equal pay in law, just as sex-based pay discrimination has no place, nor should racial discrimination. Now, violence against women and girls is at an epidemic level. In recent years, in the UK, a woman has been killed by a man every 3 days on average. We are all in this House still in profound shock over the recent murders of Carol, Louise and Hannah Hunt. And we send our condolences and love to a grief-stricken husband and father, John Hunt. The draft bill and the mission to halve these brutal, devastating statistics is something we should all want to achieve for our daughters, our granddaughters, our nieces and sisters. We must all do better as a society. And finally, I'm glad to see devolution play such a prominent role. Just under 2 years ago, when our King acceded to the British throne, I greatly admired the way he showed genuine affection and respect for our nations and regions by visiting them straight away, especially Scotland, which was his first stop. Now, I was there outside the Scottish Parliament reporting, and people were so enthusiastic and touched, not just by his presence, but by the fact he was wearing a kilt. In fact, the woman next to me commented, "It's no easy looking good in a kilt." And fair play, he's got a cracking set of pins. Now, our new Prime Minister made a similar trip across these Great Isles, but thankfully very much in trousers. And I'm pleased to see the creation of a Council of Nations and Regions, which will bring together our First Ministers, our regional mayors and their collective wisdom. I'm also very pleased to see that GB Energy will be headquartered in Scotland. Now, I could not let the occasion pass without remarking on the fact that my side had a very good night in Scotland after many, many years in the wilderness. At one point, there were more pandas in Edinburgh Zoo than there were Labour MPs in Scotland. There was just one Scottish Labour MP for a very long time. He is now the new Scottish Secretary. I asked him what was the best thing about going from 1 to 37, and he said, "I'll tell you what, Secret Santa's going to be so much more fun this year." Now, having lost a fair few elections, actually many, many elections on this side, we know how painful it is to lose power. And I say this in good faith, that I hope the opposite benches do learn the right lessons and regroup, because good governance needs good opposition. That is an important function of our democracy. Now, this is a big moment for all of us here today as we start a new session of Parliament under a new Labour government. Yes, there is excitement, there is passion, there is anticipation, but there is also humility and a recognition that it has been a long, hard, tough spell in opposition for 14 years. As my good friend Lord Reid cited those inspiring words about the opportunity to serve from the late, great John Smith, perhaps the greatest Prime Minister we never had. John Smith also said this from his first ever speech as Labour leader in 1992. "I say to the people of this country, it is right that we are ambitious for ourselves and our children. It is right that we should aspire for better lives and for a better Britain. But let that commitment be matched by the commitment and action of their government." And those words from John Smith seem so pertinent as we stand here today. We have been given the chance to serve by the British people. We now need to get to work and deliver for them. My Lords, it has been such a privilege to speak here today, and I beg to move my noble friend's motion for a humble address in reply to His Majesty's most gracious speech.
Well, my lords, what a privilege it is to follow the noble Lord, Lord Reid of Cardowan, and the noble Baroness Lady Hazarika, two absolutely brilliant children of Coatbridge. Now, the noble Lord, Lord Reid, whose speech was, as ever, brilliant, humorous and direct. When I was at that dispatch box, my lords, and saw him stirring with that disarming smile, I knew I was in for big trouble. But I always knew that no political difference would ever stop a friendly drink afterwards in the Bishop's Bar. My lords, that's the true spirit of our house, and may it always be so. I was actually shocked to find he was 77 years young, my lords, and I'd hate to see him go at the end of the Parliament. Along with 89 of our other friends on the benches opposite. My lords, seriously, we can ill afford to lose such voices of experience. Yeah. Now, my lords, the noble Baroness Lady Hazarika already charmed the House by her intelligence and good humour. And as many in the House will know, alongside her brilliant public, political and professional broadcasting careers, she has been a successful stand-up comic, which is actually one of the hardest things to be. And she certainly proved why today, and how much we look forward to hearing from her in both the serious and the humorous vein which she combines so well. My lords, actually my last engagement as Lord Privy Seal was the state banquet for the Emperor of Japan. And as I sat there listening to the Emperor speaking of his late grandfather, I was reminded of the broadcast that the Emperor Hirohito gave in 1945 after the dropping of the atomic bomb. The war situation, he declared, has developed not necessarily to the advantage of Japan. Well, I think I may say, my lords, that since that banquet, the political situation has developed not necessarily to the advantage of the Conservative Party. Now, my lords, we now find ourselves with a different view to contemplate, though when I look at the crossbenches opposite and recall all those repeated ping-pongs and 409 defeats, I do wonder if some up there now may feel themselves in more congenial company, especially if they won't reach 80 by 2029. My lords, I wholeheartedly congratulate the Labour Party on its victory, and I particularly congratulate all those on the front bench opposite and those who've supported them, who've worked so hard in the long, bleak years in opposition. I remember how that was, and I also particularly congratulate our new leader, the noble Baroness Lady Smith of Basildon. It was a huge pleasure to work with her in government. I would usually benefit from her candour, but I could always rely on her word. And I pledge to your lordships that whenever the noble Baroness puts the interests of the whole House first, I will work with her in the same constructive spirit. And when she replies, I do hope the noble Baroness can say something of the balance of what to me looks a very overweight legislative programme. How long will this session actually be? And I trust ample time will be given to your lordships to scrutinise these measures. Can she tell us how many bills will start in this House and which will be the first we receive? My lords, you will also note I could not go on without a kind word about the Liberal Democrats. I congratulate them too on their successes and declare they're no longer quite so grossly overrepresented in your lordship's House. But perhaps now, my lords, they can leave some of the strain of making quite so many speeches to their eager new colleagues in the other place. Of course, I welcome elements of the gracious speech, and not least the clear consistency of purpose where we stand together in support of the people of Ukraine. And like the noble Baroness, I welcome the aim to halve violence against women and girls. But surely, my lords, our aim must be over time to eliminate this vile behaviour forever. There are inconsistencies in the speech which will be picked out, no doubt, in the debate ahead. For example, the promise of devolution, but the taking of more power for central government to dictate building on the green belt. My Lords, this good-humoured day will have brought joy to many on the benches opposite. But there is a serious matter before your Lordships, and as Leader of the Opposition I must address it. The gracious speech alluded to one part of a manifesto package that would radically alter your Lordship's House. There are 4 elements: removing immediately all the formerly hereditary peers, moving by 2029 any peer now aged 75 or more, mandating a new participation requirement, and finally then, only then, to consider how your Lordship's House might be, and I quote, replaced. From half of us out, I guess, to perhaps all of us out in some way, sometime, that the party opposite has not managed to figure out in 25 years. My Lords, I think many of us know that these proposals cannot have been put together by the noble Baroness, the Leader of the House. The manifesto says we, that is the executive, will introduce a new participation requirement. Will the noble Baroness, when she replies, tell us precisely what measure of participation for peers will be planned? Now, if it's interruption, I think the noble Lord Fawkes of Cumnock is very safe, top of the list. But it will be interesting to know what actually is wanted. Then, my Lords, we have proposed plans to the changes to the membership of the House. And let me say this, the Labour Party has a political right to remove former hereditary peers. But it has a constitutional responsibility to say what follows. It did not do that in 1999, and it still has not done so today. My Lords, no one inherits a seat in our House anymore, and no hereditary peer has the right by birth to sit and vote in this House. Our hereditary colleagues who remain are not the port-swilling backwoodsmen of ancient legend. They are people we know, some of the most active among us, some of the voices we most respect. The Lord Strathclyde, my noble friend Earl Howe, the convener of the crossbench peers, the noble Lord Vokes. I could go on. Dedicated frontbenchers on both sides, deputy speakers, and some of our most assiduous backbenchers all round the House. Can we afford their loss? And then there is the element which, though not mentioned in the gracious speeches I have alluded to, and that is the proposed ousting of those now aged 75 or more, ejecting a great deal of accumulated wisdom that makes this House different from the other place. Again, my Lords, that proposal cannot have been concocted here. The figures are stark. Ejecting hereditary peers and those now over 75 would remove some 390 members of this House by 2029, and 107 crossbenchers, some 60% of their number, would be out. That, in my submission, would be regrettable. Now, my Lords, this is a House of consensus, of compromise, of convention, and I think we can do better. What guarantees that a government's programme passes is not numbers, it is convention. I thought it quite wrong that this House defeated the last government on record numbers of occasions and with record rounds of ping-pong. I never hid that. I thought it wrong under a Conservative government, and I think it would be wrong under a Labour government. This House has every right and indeed a duty to engage with ministers and to ask the other place to think again. But an unelected House must never be a House of opposition. The days of wilful defeats of an elected government should stop. And while I am leader, my Lords, I will seek to lead in that responsible tone. When I was your leader, I reached across the chamber, as did the convener of crossbench peers, to offer discussions to strengthen the conventions that guide this House in ways that would both preserve your Lordship's freedoms and give security to all governments. That offer remains open. I believe it to be the best course, but convention will be tested, perhaps to destruction, if we plunge down the road to partisan purges and pointless conflicts. I offer that advice, my Lords, in a spirit of goodwill and amity, and with no rancour on a day that I salute the success of the Labour Party and the pleasure that friends opposite, if I may call them that today, take in that victory. But as we go forward, there should be consideration for all the members of this House, consultation on all Labour's proposals for this House. There should be a search for consensus and a reinforcement of convention. And I ask our leader, whom we also respect, to impress on her colleagues, perhaps less understanding of this course, the greater wisdom and the surer efficacy of that way. My Lords, having been serious for a moment, let me say peace and goodwill to all. It is an honour and a privilege to have served on that side and to serve in this side and to know you all as fellow workers. And I wish Godspeed to all in this new Parliament ahead. I beg to move that this debate be adjourned until tomorrow.
Be adjourned till tomorrow.
My Lords, I'd like to begin by congratulating the noble Lord Reid and Baroness Hazarika for moving and seconding the humble address. Whenever Lord Reid intervenes in your Lordship's House, we all tend to lean forward slightly to make sure we don't miss what in recent years has tended to be a lethal attack on the government and the hapless minister trying to defend it. He may have to modify that approach slightly under the new government, but I'm sure he won't turn from being one of the Chamber's Rottweilers into a government poodle. I certainly hope not. My Lords, Baroness Hazarika, amongst many accomplishments, is a noted comedian. Many electors, of course, think all politicians are comedians. But she, unlike the rest of us, is able legitimately to take that as a compliment rather than a criticism. And she's shown today how she can combine both roles. My Lords, it's a great pleasure to welcome Baroness Smith as the new leader of your Lordship's House. We have worked closely together in recent years, particularly on matters European, and I hope that on that issue and on others we can find common cause in the future. I'd also like to record my appreciation of the way in which Lord True fulfilled his role as leader of the House. As your Lordships will know, he has not always regarded the Liberal Democrats with unalloyed positivity. But he was extremely collegiate as leader and helpful to me personally, and I wish him well in his new role. My Lords, I also wish the government well. It's taken over at a time of very great difficulties, both domestic and international. And my principal concern about this government, unlike its predecessor, is not so much what it's trying to achieve, but whether its approach is ambitious enough to meet its own declared aims. On the economy, a combination of stability, planning and a focus on growth will in themselves improve market sentiment, as will some of its specific initiatives, such as the creation of Great British Energy. But where the government's plan seems worryingly thin to me is around workforce planning. It's good having ambitious plans for investment, whether in housing, infrastructure or energy, but even with the planned replacement of the apprenticeship levy and reforms to FE colleges, skilled workers over the course of the coming Parliament are going to be in very short supply. I hope that the government will be prepared to accept that in the short term, such skills gaps can only be fully met by increased recruitment from overseas, and that they'll take steps to facilitate this. My Lords, the state of our public services has rightly been identified by the government as dire. We welcome the focus on improving the performance of the NHS, but we believe that the government should go further by now giving patients a right to see a GP within a week and to start cancer treatment within 2 months of an urgent diagnosis. We're particularly disappointed to see nothing in the speech about social care, where the crisis is ever present. But the much-trailed suggestion even of a Royal Commission appears to have vanished. And in any event, no Royal Commission can help with today's problems of bed blocking, and generally inadequate levels of provision. My Lords, on the environment, the Government's approach is a welcome contrast to that of its predecessor. But on the urgent issue of the failing water companies, we remain unconvinced that it's willing to take the necessary action. Water companies should not be for-profit entities. And as long as this underlying structural problem exists, we have no confidence that they'll meet consumer needs for clean water courses and seas at an acceptable cost. On foreign affairs, we support the Government's stance on Ukraine. We also agree that an immediate bilateral ceasefire in Gaza, coupled with the release of the remaining hostages, is a priority. But we believe that the Government should go further by halting arms sales to Israel, recommencing support for UNRWA, and immediately recognising the State of Palestine. My Lords, the Government's change of tone on Europe is also welcome, and we agree that working together on security and migration should be urgently progressed. But, my Lords, this is not nearly enough. We should be agreeing an ambitious new youth exchange programme. We should be reaching quick agreements on trade in foodstuffs, plants and animals. But we should also be looking for a much more ambitious trading arrangement and accepting that if any long-term growth strategy is to succeed for the UK, we need to be moving towards rejoining the single market and removing the shackles which currently prevent so many businesses, particularly small businesses, doing business with our largest trading partner. I'm not entirely without hope, however. The noble Lord Hermer, the new Attorney General, when asked a couple of years ago what piece of legislation he would like to see introduced, said, "The European Union, open brackets, please can we come back, question mark, close brackets, Act." I would like to assure him that were he to introduce such a bill into your Lordship's House, he would have the wholehearted support of the Liberal Democrats. But, my Lords, the area where the Government's approach falls, in our view, spectacularly short of what's required relates to the way in which we run our democracy. I can see why, today, the Labour Party thinks a system which gives them a landslide victory on a mere third of the votes has a lot to recommend it. But even they must accept that this system stinks. For once, the Liberal Democrats find ourselves with a number of MPs which broadly reflects our vote share. But the sense of injustice which we have felt in the past is now rightly being felt by those who voted Reform or Green. And it's hardly surprising, therefore, that there's a cynicism across the country about a system which produces such a result. And this cynicism leads in some cases to anger and in others to apathy. And in either case, it's bad for democracy and should be rectified by the introduction of a proportional electoral system, in line with Labour Party policy. As for your Lordship's House, we enter this Parliament in a position where, after all the new appointees are introduced, we will see the Conservatives with 281 peers compared to our 80. Noble Lords will recall that after the previous 3 general elections, Conservative peers argued that we were grossly overrepresented because of our weak position in the Commons. I hope, therefore, that they will now agree that, to follow their own logic, Liberal Democrats should get another 87 peers to align us with our 2 parties' representation in the Commons, or that they should voluntarily reduce their numbers to 134 to bring them into line with our 80. And I'm particularly looking forward to hearing the noble Lord Forsyth's view on this issue. On Lords reform, we remain of the view that all legislatures should be elected, but we accept that this government will not move in this direction. In the absence of fundamental reform, we welcome the plan to abolish the remaining hereditaries and to introduce a retirement age. I am, however, a bit worried that only a consultation is planned on the latter change. There's a well-known equation which relates to Lord's reform, namely that reform proposals plus consultation equals inaction. We will therefore be pressing the government for a speedy timetable for any consultation and for the resulting reform. My Lords, on these benches, it's a great relief that we've done with the previous administration. We believe that the present government will have greater respect for the Nolan principles and set higher standards in public life. We believe it has identified the key challenges facing the country, but we believe it will need pushing to be ambitious enough to achieve its goals, and that's what we will now seek to do.
My Lords, I would first like to thank their Majesties for gracing us with their presence today. I'm sure the whole House will join me in wishing Her Majesty a very happy birthday. And my Lords, it is a great pleasure to follow all noble lords who have moved and supported the humble address. This is my 8th response from the dispatch box, and in a break from tradition, it's my first from this side of the chamber. And can I just say I've greatly appreciated the many messages I've received from across the whole House. My Lords, it's a pleasure to welcome back all noble lords for this Parliament, with a special mention to new colleagues who will be taking up ministerial office. I know that many members here, though we're not an entirely political House, but many members were involved in the general election, sharing the highs and lows, and riding, sure the noble Lord Newby did, the Ed Davey roller coaster of campaign emotions. Although today is a happy occasion, I just want to take a moment to remember those colleagues who are not with us today. We are fortunate that we make many friends across your Lordship's House, and I think it's right that we remember those who have passed and retired in the last session. And my Lords, on the topic of friendship, I'd like to thank my colleagues on the Labour benches. For the 9 long years I've been leading the opposition, I have enjoyed and been sustained by your support. My sincere thanks to you, particularly to those who have served on our front bench and as deputy leaders, chief and deputy chief whips. And my Lords, I'm sure the whole House will join me in thanking those who served in the last government. It is not always recognised just how demanding the work of ministers and whips can be. And we especially appreciated those whose courtesy and generosity of spirit, both in the chamber and outside, was in the best traditions of public service. They allowed your Lordship's House to fulfil our responsibilities as a scrutiny and revising chamber. Now, it's an honour and a privilege to be the leader of your Lordship's House and to succeed the noble Lord True. His natural modesty and reticence probably means he'll frown at me at this point, and he is. The noble Lord is passionate about the constitutional role of your Lordship's House, and his respect for that never dims. Having started as a special advisor in 1997, becoming a peer in 2011, and then leader from 2022. And the leader has a dual responsibility here, to their government and to this House. And the noble Lord navigated that with thoughtfulness and consideration. And personally, I also thank him. We generally agreed on House matters, but when we didn't, we were able to disagree agreeably. And I look forward, hopefully, to maintaining that constructive relationship. And my Lords, the relationship with the leadership quad of Noble Lady Lady Williams of Trafford, and the Noble Earls Lord Howe and Courtselm made the usual channels discussions constructive and friendly. My noble friend Lord Kennedy of Southwark paid tribute to the Noble Lady Baroness Williams at prorogation, and I had my own thanks. Throughout her time in government, she was open and engaging. And my Lords, I also want to pay tribute to the Noble Earl Lord Howe, who has so far served on the Conservative front bench for a record 33 years. Latterly, as Deputy Leader. He has many friends across this House. And I hope he doesn't mind me saying that those of us who've been privileged to witness his acting skills all concur that the theatre's loss is Parliament's gain. My Lords, it's a great pleasure to thank the proposer and seconder of the motion for the humble address. My noble friend, Lord Reid, served in a number of positions in the Cabinet and was the first Secretary of State that I worked for as Minister in Northern Ireland. That set a very high bar. Then, as today, he showed a deep political analysis, a passion for public service, and affectionate humour. Like all in your Lordship's House, I greatly enjoyed some of his more colourful tales today, and there were many more, though I fear I'm not the only one left with this lingering image of his hotel pool encounter with Lady Olga Maitland. On a more serious note, we must listen to his warnings about extremism being alive again across Europe. He understands how history can repeat itself, and he's correct that it will fall upon social democrats in the widest sense to restore the faith not just in good government, but faith in politics more broadly. My noble friend, Baroness Hazarika, having already impressed with her maiden speech for the election, has trumped it with a contribution that reinforces the star quality she brings to our proceedings. Many of you will know her as a journalist and a broadcaster. I first met her when she was a special advisor in the last Labour government, and we would brief Harriet Harman for PMQs when she stood in for Gordon Brown. That was obviously great training for her next career as a stand-up comedian. And that combination of a fierce political intellect, a generosity of spirit, and the ability to see humour in so much of her life makes her a valuable and welcome member of your Lordship's House. Yeah. Having worked on the Equality Act, my noble friend knows the transformative power of Labour governments. She rightly raised issues relating to gender and race, and there is much more work for us to do, and I look forward to her contributions. My Lords, before turning to the content of the King's speech, I want to briefly reflect on the work of your Lordship's House. I've had some time to think about this. The government has a clear mandate for its programme and has also made a firm commitment to change the way politics is done. Now, I don't want to tread on the toes of the Chief Whip too early in announcing the length of the session, which will be announced in due course, or which bills will be coming forward. I can tell the noble lord there will be 3 bills starting your lordships to be announced very soon. But what I do want to say, it is important that we in your Lordship's House have the opportunity to contribute in a meaningful way. The wide range of expertise here can benefit the scrutiny of legislation. Now, obviously, there was never a golden age when a Secretary of State rejoiced at Lord's amendments. But in recent years, sensible proposals have too often just been resisted by default. Ministers in our government will not accept all changes, but when the House expresses a constructive view, the government should treat that with respect. Those of us who those praise from the back benches, I hope that can I just say I hope that lasts. But those of us who champion this House know that it works best when carrying out its functions of deliberation, scrutiny and challenge, and not seeking to be a replica of the other place, or simply to manage business by numbers. Now, I am encouraged and supported by the Leader of the House of Commons, Lucy Powell, who is in the same place as the Chief Whip and I on this, of taking a whole Parliament approach to achieve the best legislation. And I am especially pleased that for the first time since 2010, to have an Attorney General in your Lordship's House with a deep commitment to upholding the rule of law. Yeah. My Lords, this government will do its best to ensure that bills are developed ahead of introduction and recognise the value of the rules and conventions of this House. Now, at times, urgency may be essential, and I hope on those occasions, just as we worked with the previous government on those occasions, the opposition will do the same with us. But, my Lords, we won't always get it right first time, but it is our dedicated aim, and we understand our responsibility as a government to do all we can to make it work, to ensure that both government and Parliament benefits from the constructive consideration of legislation. My Lords, as I move on to the legislative programme, I think I have to say, perhaps we've got the balance right when one part of the opposition is saying, you're doing too much, how long will it take? And the other side is saying, you're not enough. So perhaps we've got the balance right on that one. But can I just say, I think the greatest challenge is to re-establish the confidence in our democratic and political system, to show that it has the capacity to be a force for good. The morning after the election, in his first address to Downing Street, the Prime Minister reflected that too few people believe that the future will be better for their children. He pledged to lead a government guided by public service and committed to national renewal. Since the pandemic, life satisfaction has declined, anxiety levels have increased, and the cost of living crisis added to a decline in living standards, and the world feels more volatile than it has for many years. Driven by our mission-led approach to government, the Gracious Speech is an exciting and ambitious legislative programme. It's to kick-start that period of national renewal and to lay the foundations for a country which is more secure, is fairer, and with opportunity for all. And, my lords, there's no time to waste. Indeed, work has already begun. The Chancellor's announcement of a National Wealth Fund will unlock private investment for infrastructure projects as part of our efforts to take the country from the bottom of the international GDP tables towards the top. The King's Speech sets out a number of measures to secure economic growth. Our Planning and Infrastructure Bill, alongside an Industrial Strategy Council, will get Britain building again. And through a strategic partnership with business, working people and government, we will prioritise wealth for all communities, regions and nations. British businesses and workers will take advantage of new technologies and skills, not just for a sustainable future, but to improve productivity and lead the world in AI. And the Fiscal Lock Bill will ensure our tax and spending changes are independently considered by the Office of Budget Responsibility to reinforce market confidence and restore public trust. And devolution transport legislation will empower civic leaders to ensure that decision-making reflects local need and demand. My lords, tackling the climate emergency isn't just an environmental imperative, but it is also an economic opportunity. We have already scrapped the ban on onshore wind, and legislation to establish Great British Energy alongside the Crown Estate Bill will boost investment, expand renewable sources and bring us closer to achieving energy independence and security. But the first duty of any government is the safety and security of its citizens. The implementation of laws to strengthen security at public events and venues, Martin's Law, is the culmination of a campaign that followed the tragic and terrible events at Manchester Arena in 2017. I commend those campaigners. We'll also work to reduce violent crimes, raise confidence in the police and criminal justice system, and drastically reduce violence against women and girls. My lords, on immigration, debate has felt too often like a political campaign tool rather than a serious determination to deal with issues. Our Border Security Command will work with national and international partners to strengthen our borders, bring criminal people smugglers to justice and deter illegal migration to the UK. And it's essential to do this that we harness the potential of all, regardless of background or means. We will break down the barriers to opportunity and raise education standards through the Children's Wellbeing Bill. And by removing the private school exemption, we'll fund the recruitment of more than 6,000 new teachers, improving state schools' pupils' access to qualified staff in core subjects. And we'll also do more to ensure children attend and that they receive the mental health support that they need. We will work with businesses on a skills bill and other initiatives, not just to grow the economy, but to give young people the skills and job opportunities they need to achieve their true potential. And we will also deliver the long overdue Renters Reform Bill, giving renters greater protections and ending no-fault evictions. My noble friend, the Government Chief Whip, will also be delighted that we will progress further reform of leasehold and commonhold, starting with important pre-leg scrutiny. My Lords, those that use and work in our National Health Service deserve better. Through a number of initiatives, including bills on smoking and mental health, we will build an NHS fit for the future, reducing waiting times and providing more mental health support, and improving preventative public health care. Now, my Lords, as already been alluded to, the gracious speech, as I think people noticed, included a bill to remove the remaining hereditary peers sitting in your Lordship's House, which was intended as a temporary measure but has lasted for 25 years. Now, I was delighted that the Noble Lord, the Leader of the Opposition, had taken such great interest in our manifesto. Most of the issues he spoke about were actually in the manifesto, not in this King's speech. And the point the Noble Lord made about consultation, I think it is helpful for this House. As a House, we discuss how to move forward on these issues. That's not about delay. I think it's courtesy and consideration to ensure we get things right. But, my Lords, when the bill on hereditary peers was introduced, we will then have the opportunity to debate the details of it. But I want at the outset to recognise the public service of those peers, many of whom have made an important contribution to your Lordship's House. And, my Lords, I am told that without the strapping young hereditary peers, we would never have won the men's tug-of-war competition against the House of Commons. There is a lesson there that why we lost the women's tug-of-war in the House of Commons. My Lords, this is the opening session of this Parliament and for our new government, and I am proud that this King's speech sets out an ambitious programme for change. This is the first step in delivering the Prime Minister's promises to return politics to service and to restore people's trust in public institutions. And it's a signal of our determination to enhance the UK's reputation for fiscal responsibility, as a destination for investment and as a reliable partner on the global stage. And I see it also as an important shift in attitude, with mission-led government to deliver stronger growth, healthier public services and improved opportunity for all. And finally, my Lords, as I've said, I am proud and honoured to have the dual role that I referred to earlier, of representing this House in the Cabinet and also being a member of the government in your Lordship's House. And I can assure Noble Lords that myself, the Chief Whip, and all members of the government here look forward to engaging with Noble Lords across the House. Collectively, we have an important duty to carry out over the course of this session, and with that call to action, it gives me great pleasure to support the motion.
Yeah. The question is that this debate be adjourned until tomorrow. As many as are of that opinion will say content. Content. The contrary not content, the contents have it. Appointment of the Senior Deputy Speaker, the Lord Privy Seal.
To the right point. My Lords, I beg to move that Lord Gardner of Kimble be appointed as a Senior Deputy Speaker for this session.
The question is that Lord Gardner of Kimble be appointed as Senior Deputy Speaker for this session. As many as of that opinion will say content. Content. The contrary not content. The contents have it. Nemine dissentienti.
My Lords, I'm aware a number of members would now like to take the oath of allegiance. Noble Lords who wish to leave the chamber should do so now. We'll pause for a few moments before we allow oath taking to proceed.